had this fantastic question from a young lady, and I always love when women write in because it gives us a totally different perspective. And I thought that this was just such a great question because I've run into patients with sex headaches, I would say maybe about 6 times in my whole career. And Mahalia writes in and she says, she was asking about nitric oxide, and she says, great. If it's appropriate, I get sex headaches at the peak of orgasms when using toys, especially the shower head. Should I seek an MRI or just avoid what causes the intense headaches that subsides within 5 minutes when I apply cold water on the back of my neck? Right. So thank you, Mahalia, for this question. Now, the first time I ever heard about this question, it was a guy friend of mine. He texts me, he says, Rachael, guess what? I was having sex with this girl last night and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, in the middle, I give her an orgasm so badly that she passed out and had a really terrible headache. So it was interesting to me because he was very proud of it. He was like, yeah, I did that. And now she got a headache. And I remember at the time thinking, hold on. I don't think that's something that we should be celebrating, because the first time I heard this was in college. I want you to imagine being in a situation where you are in the throes of passion. Things are going great. Now, this isn't because you've taken some Viagra or Cialis or anything, but because you're in the throes of passion, you end up starting to get a headache during sex. And then before you know it, you have an orgasm and that headache reaches like a 10 and you're like, oh my God, this headache is killing me. What's going on? So sex headaches, although they're pretty uncommon, they're estimated to impact anywhere between 1% to 2% of the population. And like I said, in my lifetime, I've encountered a number of people who've had this. Now, clinically, sex headaches tend to happen more in guys, but they happen both in men and women. And clinically, we call it a primary headache associated with sexual activity, abbreviated PHASA. And before, back in the 80s and the 70s, when they were first realizing that this was such a thing, they were actually called benign sexual headaches, because most of the time it was caused by not a serious underlying condition, but some benign condition causing the headaches. So sex headaches usually show up sometimes after the 40th birthday. And like I said, they do impact both men and women, but men more so than women. And there's some indication that sometimes this happens along family lines. Like you'll talk to your brother or your sister. They'll be like, you know what? I get those headaches too. And they tend to be associated with people who have had or get migraines from time to time. And when we're classifying these headaches, we classify them as 2 different ones. Like type 1 usually happens early in the phase, before orgasm even hits, kind of working up to it. And this type of headache is usually kind of short-lived, happens for 15 minutes or so, and it kind of goes away, but it's still a moderate level of pain. The type 2 headache is usually associated with, orgasm. Like it kind of could lead up to it, but it's a sudden impact with heavy, strong orgasm. It's abrupt, it's severe, and it can last anywhere from 20 minutes to some hours. Now, with that being the case, when I got that first message, from a guy friend of mine years ago, when he was saying, he had sex with this lady and she had this headache, he knocked it out so tough that now she was having a headache, that was generally a type 2, because that happened at orgasm, right? Now, it's been hypothesized, or they've broken it down into 3 different causes of the sex headache. So one is basic muscle contractions. Now, that's going to be more of the sex headache that starts like early in sex. And these headaches are usually kind of in the back of the head, or they're generalized, and people describe them more as like a tightness. And it gets worse right at orgasm, but it's kind of building its way up. And this type of headache is actually thought to occur due to muscle contractions and muscle spasms. So like the head contracting and the facial muscles contracting and the shoulder muscles contracting and kind of forming a bit of a spasm as you work your way towards orgasm. Now, those types that are due to muscle spasms, those can actually tend to last hours to days. Because remember, when it's a muscle spasm or contraction of a muscle, think of it like a Charlie horse, right? A Charlie horse in your neck or your head or your scalp or your face, it becomes even tender to touch. It becomes like massaging it out, right? Then the other reason is a blood vessel spasm. So this is called a vascular type of headache, and we see vascular types of headaches like with migraine sufferers. And this is the most frequent cause of a sex headache. And this is usually the one that's going to occur right before or during orgasm. And it's always really severe. These people, almost want to go to the hospital. Sometimes they might pass out. Sometimes they just really in excruciating pain. They want to roll up in a ball. And it's usually either across the front of the face, forehead, or maybe even the back of the head. And this type of headache is really thought to have been brought on by kind of changes in the blood pressure. Changes in the blood pressure, changes in the contraction of the blood vessels. And that's what happens when you're getting to the orgasm space, right? That's why, in the message that was sent to me, that's why she said, I get this headache when I use my sex toys, but not when I'm having sex, right? Because the sex toys are bringing on this like spasm type of thing, and it's increasing the pressure, changing the blood vessels in the head, and that's ultimately how you have that type of headache. And then the other third type of headache that's usually associated with sex headache is because of something called cerebral spinal fluid. So our whole neurological system, the brain, the spinal cord, is housed in fluid, like it sits around in fluid, and that's called the CSF, or the cerebral spinal fluid. So what's happening in some of these cases is that the sex was so intense that they're suspecting you get a small tear in the lining, which causes that CSF to leak out. And as a result of the CSF, or the fluid that our brain is sitting in and our spinal cord is bathed in, that when that fluid sits out, the pressure in there becomes low and a headache happens. And these types of headaches are more so positionally related. Like these people will tell you, it feels so much better when I lay flat, but when I sit up, it hurts really badly. Right? So those are the three different causes. Now, some things to keep in mind about these primary headaches associated with sexual activity is that, one, there is an association and relationship between migraine sufferers and sex headaches, right? So these orgasm-induced sex headaches and migraines are associated anywhere between 25 to 47% of the time. So, and then 40% of the people who get the sex headaches also get headaches with prolonged physical exercise. So those of you who like say, you know what, jogging isn't for me. I've tried it. It's not for me. Every time I jog, I get an excruciating headache. Well, then, there's an association between that type of headache and a sex headache. And then sex headaches are associated with some bad stuff too. They can be associated with brain-related lesions, blood vessel disorders, AV malformations, which basically means that the arteries and the veins are kind of together in a way that maybe isn't the normal way that the anatomy happens. Hematomas are associated with inflammation, aneurysms. Aneurysms are like when your blood vessels have like a bulging balloon-like sac on it. So with that being the case, if you ever get a severe headache right when you have an orgasm, it really makes sense to get it checked out. You can get it checked out once, you can figure out that it's nothing or that it is something, and that you can actually kind of proceed that way, right? Because here's the thing. Once you know it's nothing, like once you have a really bad headache and you go and get it evaluated and you find out that it's nothing, then you can rest comfortably whenever you get these headaches again. So if you've ever had a sudden headache during sex, or your partner has a sudden headache during sex, it's the worst headache they've ever had. Maybe they lose consciousness. Maybe they, start to have some neurological deficits. That really means that you need to get evaluated. This should be considered an emergency at that point. And what they should consider doing is some neurovascular imaging, which is basically like an MRI of the brain or an MRA, which is basically an MRI, but they're looking at the vasculature. They're actually looking at the arteries. So now, should one of these massive headaches ever occur, or if this is something that you're suffering from or your partner's suffering from, some things to keep in mind: muscle relaxation strategies in advance. So jaw, neck, scalp, shoulder muscles before and after sex, considering a bit of a massage, right? Also consider increasing the intake of vitamin B6. Now, vitamin B6 is a vitamin that we know is associated with widening blood vessels and helping prevent vascular spasms that can lead to headaches. So even migraine sufferers, we advocate that they increase vitamin B6 intake. You want to also consider this nitric oxide connection that we always talk about, boosting nitric oxide production to improve that blood vessel health, kind of widen blood vessels so they're relaxed and elastic so that they're not spasming, and can help reduce the incidence of vascular headaches. Another thing, magnesium, we talk about it a lot. Boost magnesium, because magnesium is nature's muscle relaxant, right? Remember, it's a natural calcium channel blocker. It relaxes muscles naturally. So consider supplementing or adding magnesium into the mix. Glycinate or taurate magnesium can make a big difference. And then consider diet stuff. Start snacking on celery or even celery juice. Celery can help reduce stress hormone release, right? And when you're in the throes of passion, about to orgasm, those stress hormones flood through the body, race through the body. And if you can actually kind of theoretically blunt the surge, that adrenaline surge that happens at orgasm, then potentially you can prevent a sex headache because there's no adrenaline surge, right? And then, of course, good old-fashioned peppermint oil has been clinically studied. I think even most Western-trained doctors will tell you, yes, peppermint oil has been shown to help with cluster headaches. And what peppermint oil does is it's actually, you kind of rub it on the areas that you feel the tension in. You rub it in, you leave it on, and then 15, 30 minutes, you try to rub it on again. Actually, when it's studied with cluster headaches, they find that peppermint oil can almost be just as effective as like taking some good old-fashioned Tylenol. So Western treatment focuses on treating sex headaches with anti-inflammatories, like an Advil or an Aleve or indomethacin, and beta blockers. We talked about beta blockers here before, but also we almost think of celery as having the components that is like nature's version of a beta blocker. So that is why some of these things may help. So we've got the traditional options that you can try, going the medication route, but we also have some of the natural ways that you can try to help minimize or help prevent the sex headache. But a sex headache is a real thing. Can you imagine how it would feel to have to try to avoid sex or avoid enjoying sex too much because you don't want to get a headache? So if that is you or that is your partner, then share some of these tips so that it doesn't have to be a traumatic experience every time you have an orgasm, because it's supposed to be an amazing adventure instead of one that's like, screaming in pain instead of screaming in ecstasy.